The first time Adrian Cole ever noticed me, I wasn't standing in front of him. I was holding a secret that could cost him millions. For almost 2 years, I had worked inside Adrian Cole's mansion, without becoming part of his world. That was the strange thing about being a maid in a house like his. You learned everything while being noticed by almost no one. I knew Adrian took his coffee black, no sugar. I knew he hated fingerprints on the walnut desk in his private library. I knew the grandfather clock outside his office ran exactly 3 minutes slow, because nobody except me ever bothered checking it. And I knew that whenever 3 black SUVs appeared outside before sunrise, something important was about to happen. That Tuesday morning, there were 7. I counted them through the kitchen window while polishing a silver tray. Men in tailored suits moved through the mansion with phones pressed to their ears. Security checked doors that were already locked. Someone carried 3 leather document cases upstairs. I heard the house manager whisper that Mr. Cole's meeting at noon involved more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. I tried not to think about that while calculating whether the $83 left in my checking account could cover groceries and my electric bill. That was Adrian's world, and mine in one sentence. He negotiated millions before lunch. I checked prices before buying milk. At 26, I had become very good at surviving quietly. My father used to say, "Quiet people noticed what loud people missed." I hadn't understood him when I was a child. After he died, I understood it too well. Around 10:30, I was sent to clean the library before Adrian's guests arrived. Sunlight spilled through windows nearly 12 feet tall, turning the polished floor gold. I was straightening the cushions on a leather sofa when something flashed beneath it. Silver. I crouched and reached underneath, expecting a coin or watch clasp. Instead, my fingers closed around a cufflink. Heavy, expensive, cold against my palm, an engraved wolf's head covered its face. I stopped breathing. For several seconds, the room disappeared. I wasn't 26 anymore. I was 15, sitting on the floor of our old apartment while my father packed away documents he never explained. I remembered a small wooden box, his nervous hands, and a silver wolf staring up at me before he snapped the lid shut. I hadn't seen that symbol since the year he died. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. I closed my fist around the cufflink and stood. Adrian entered with 2 men behind him. At 34, he had the kind of presence that made conversations end without him asking. Dark suit, controlled expression, pale grey eyes that seemed to measure everything once and never need a second look. He walked past me toward his desk. No greeting, no recognition. I lowered my eyes automatically, but my hand tightened around the silver wolf. One of the men beside Adrian laughed about the meeting. By 1 o'clock, this deal changes everything. Adrian opened a folder. Then make sure nothing changes before noon. I should have placed the cufflink on his desk. I should have told him where I found it. Instead, I slipped it into my apron pocket. Because beneath that sofa, in the home of a man powerful enough to make million-dollar decisions before lunch, I had found the first clue to a question that had followed me for 11 years. Adrian Cole still didn't know my name. But someone entering his house carried the same symbol my father had hidden before he died, and for the first time since I started working there, I wondered if I had been cleaning Adrian Cole's secrets without realizing one of them belonged to me. By 11:15 Tuesday morning, the silver wolf in my apron pocket felt heavier than my entire past. I finished cleaning the library, changed the water in the flower arrangements, and carried fresh coffee upstairs while pretending my hands were not shaking. The mansion had grown louder. Phones rang behind closed doors. Shoes crossed marble floors in quick, measured steps. Security checked entrances that were already locked. Adrian's $12 million meeting had been moved to noon Wednesday because one of the outside parties had requested another day to review the final documents. That gave me 24 more hours, although I still had no idea what I was supposed to do with them. I kept thinking about my father. Thomas Carter had never seemed mysterious when I was little. He made pancakes on Sundays, complained about Yankees games, and saved every receipt because he said numbers told the truth when people did not. Only during his final year had he changed. He started locking drawers, taking calls outside, looking through the apartment window before going to bed. Then came the wooden box and the silver wolf. I had spent 11 years convincing myself those memories meant nothing. By Tuesday evening, most of the household staff had gone home. but I stayed late to prepare the conference rooms for Wednesday. At 8:10, I carried folded linens through the West Hall and noticed the security monitor glowing inside an open service office. Normally, that door stayed locked. I should have kept walking. Instead, I stopped. 4 live camera feeds divided the screen: front gate, garage, library corridor, West Hall. I was about to leave when movement appeared on the West Hall feed. The timestamp read 8:17. The silver-haired man from the library stepped into view. I recognized him immediately. He had visited Adrian earlier that day, and I was almost certain the cufflink in my pocket belonged to him. Then another man entered the frame. Daniel Mercer. Everyone in the mansion knew Daniel. He had advised Adrian for years. Security barely looked at him when he came through the door. On the monitor, Daniel checked both ends of the hallway before handing the silver-haired man a thick envelope. My heartbeat changed. I leaned closer. There was no audio, just 2 men speaking silently beneath the cold white numbers of the timestamp. 8:17. Then they walked out of camera range toward the private stairwell. Less than a minute later, footsteps approached the service office from the real hallway behind me. I moved into the shadow beside the half-open door. Daniel and the silver-haired man passed within a few feet of where I stood. Their voices were low, but this time they were real. "Tomorrow," the silver-haired man said. Daniel answered, "Once Cole signs, it is done." They kept walking. A few seconds later, I heard Daniel add, "He will not know until it is too late." I stayed frozen until their footsteps disappeared. Then I looked back at the monitor. 8:19. Live. No old recording. No confusion. I had just watched the exchange happen and then heard the men discussing whatever came next. The cufflink pressed against my hip through my apron. Suddenly my father's old rule returned with painful clarity. Numbers told the truth when people did not. 8:17. I repeated it silently until I knew I would never forget. I still did not know what was inside the envelope. I did not know what Daniel intended Adrian to sign at noon Wednesday, and accusing one of Adrian's most trusted advisors, based on 2 minutes of security footage and a few overheard sentences, would make me sound ridiculous. I was a maid, earning $16 an hour. Daniel Mercer helped make decisions worth millions. Adrian had every reason to believe him, and almost none to believe me. But as I stood beneath the fluorescent lights with the silver wolf hidden in my pocket, the choice became painfully simple. By noon tomorrow, Adrian would either sign those papers, or he would not. I could stay quiet and protect my job. Or I could risk everything on the possibility that my father had once tried to warn someone about the same symbol. For the first time, I was not afraid of what Adrian Cole might do if I spoke. I was afraid of what would happen if I stayed silent. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the security footage again. Daniel Mercer checking both ends of the hallway, the silver-haired man accepting the envelope. 8:17, glowing at the bottom of the screen. By 5:30 Wednesday morning, rain was tapping against my apartment window, and I was sitting at my kitchen table with my father's wooden box in front of me. I had not opened it in years. The hinges complained when I lifted the lid. Inside were old tax records, faded photographs, a baseball ticket from a Yankees game he took me to when I was 9, and a sealed envelope with my name written across it in his handwriting. My breath caught. I opened it carefully. There was no letter inside, only a photograph. My father stood outside an office building, beside 3 men in business suits. One face meant nothing to me. Another had been scratched by age and sunlight until I could barely see it. But the third face made the room go silent around me. Daniel Mercer. He looked younger, maybe 15 years younger, but there was no mistake. Same narrow smile, same careful eyes. My father had known him. I turned the photograph over. 3 words were written on the back. Trust the numbers. That was all. At 6:45, I arrived at the Cole mansion with the photograph in my purse and the cufflink wrapped inside a handkerchief. The meeting was scheduled for noon. I had 5 hours to decide whether I was brave or foolish. Adrian crossed the foyer shortly after 8. He was already on a call, speaking calmly about valuations and signatures, while 2 attorneys followed him toward his office. I almost stopped him, my mouth even opened. Then Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs. He saw me watching Adrian. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes did. I lowered my gaze and kept walking. That decided it. I could not confront Adrian where Daniel could hear me. At 11:20, I prepared Adrian's usual espresso, black, no sugar. The porcelain cup rattled once against the saucer before I steadied my hand. I tore a small piece from the housekeeping notepad and wrote the only things I could prove. 8:17, West Hall, Silver Wolf, do not sign. I read the words twice. They looked absurdly small. 4 short warnings against a room full of expensive lawyers, contracts, and men who had spent their lives making people like me feel invisible. I folded the note once and carried the tray upstairs. Adrian's office was empty. Voices came from the conference room down the hall. I placed the espresso on his desk and slipped the note beneath the saucer, where he would see it when he lifted the cup. Then I walked away. I did not clock out. I did not tell the house manager I was leaving. I simply stepped through the service entrance into the cold morning rain and kept moving until the mansion disappeared behind me. By the time I reached my apartment, my shoes were soaked through. I locked the door, pulled the curtains, and placed my father's photograph beside the silver cufflink on the kitchen table. Daniel Mercer smiled up at me from 15 years ago. My father stood beside him, one hand resting on a folder marked with a symbol I had somehow missed that morning. A silver wolf. I stared until my coffee went cold. My father had not wandered into Adrian Cole's world by accident. He had known Daniel before I ever heard the Cole name, and somewhere between that photograph and my father's death, something had happened that nobody had ever told me. At 11:58, my phone began ringing. The mansion's number filled the screen. I let it ring. It stopped. 10 seconds later, it rang again. This time, the caller identification showed a number I had never seen before. I answered without speaking. A man's voice came through, quiet and controlled. Emily Carter? I recognized Adrian immediately. My fingers tightened around the phone. There was a pause. Then he asked the question that told me he had found my note. What do you know about the Silver Wolf? For 3 seconds, I forgot how to breathe. Adrian Cole had probably spoken my name before, maybe approving payroll or asking the house manager who had cleaned a room, but hearing it directly from him felt different. I do not know what Silver Wolf means, I said. Then why did you write it? His voice stayed calm. That somehow made the question heavier. I looked at the photograph on my kitchen table. Because I found a silver cufflink under the library sofa yesterday. It has a wolf engraved on it. My father had something with the same symbol years ago. Silence. Not confusion. Recognition. Where is the cufflink? Adrian asked. With me. And the number 817. Check the West Hall recording from Monday night. Another pause. Then his voice moved farther from the phone. Stop the meeting. I sat upright. A second voice protested in the background. Adrian did not raise his own. I said stop it. The line went quiet for several seconds. When he returned, he asked me to tell him exactly what I had seen. I described Daniel Mercer, the silver-haired visitor, the envelope, the fragments I had overheard. Tomorrow. Signature. Cole will not know until it is done. Adrian never interrupted. When I finished, he said, "Stay where you are." Why? Because I need to verify this. That does not explain why I have to stay here. His answer came after a beat. You are right. It does not. Then the call ended. Across town, I could only imagine what happened next. I learned the details later, but Adrian told me enough to understand the moment. At 11:59, he had been sitting at the head of a long conference table, with a contract worth more than $12 million open in front of him. Daniel Mercer sat 3 seats away. Attorneys lined both sides. Adrian had already uncapped his pen when his assistant brought in the espresso I had prepared. He lifted the cup. He saw my note. 817, West Hall, Silver Wolf, do not sign. Adrian did not ask Daniel what it meant. He did not give anyone time to prepare an explanation. He closed the contract and stood. Daniel apparently smiled and asked, "Problem?" Adrian answered, "Meeting is over." One of the investors reminded him that months of negotiations had led to that room. Adrian walked out anyway. Millions waiting on the table, and he left them there because a maid who earned $16 an hour had written 4 lines on cheap housekeeping paper. He went directly to security. The recording was still archived. At 8:17, Daniel appeared exactly where I said he would. The silver-haired man joined him. The envelope changed hands. Adrian watched the footage twice. On the third viewing, he noticed something I had missed. The silver-haired man touched his left cuff just before leaving the camera frame. One cufflink was missing. At 12:23, my phone rang again. "You were telling the truth," Adrian said. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about how relieved those words made me feel. "I told you I was." "Who was your father?" My eyes returned to the photograph. "Thomas Carter." This silence lasted longer. "Adrian, I know that name." Every sound in my apartment seemed to disappear. The refrigerator, the rain, traffic 6 floors below. "How?" I whispered. "Not over the phone." "Then tell me where." "I am coming to you." I stood so quickly my chair scraped across the floor. "You do not know where I live." Adrian's voice remained perfectly calm. "Emily, you have worked in my house for 2 years." I looked at the cheap lock on my apartment door and suddenly understood how different our worlds really were. Before I could answer, he added, "Keep the cufflink, keep the photograph. Do not give either one to anyone. Not even you." Another pause. "Especially not until you hear what I have to tell you." The call ended. 20 minutes later, a black SUV stopped beneath my apartment window. Then another pulled in behind it. I watched Adrian step onto the sidewalk and look up at my building. The man who had walked away from $12 million was coming upstairs to talk about my dead father, and judging by his face, Thomas Carter had been keeping a secret from both of us. 3 knocks sounded at my door, slow and evenly spaced, and somehow that was more unsettling than pounding would have been. I looked through the peephole. Adrian stood alone. His security remained downstairs, their black SUVs visible through the rain-streaked window at the end of the hallway. I opened the door but kept one hand on it. For the first time, Adrian Cole looked out of place. His tailored charcoal suit belonged beneath chandeliers and behind $12 million contracts, not beneath the flickering hallway light of a building where the elevator had been broken for 3 weeks. His eyes moved past me toward the bucket catching water beneath the ceiling leak, then to the worn carpet, then back to me. "May I come in?" he asked. The question surprised me more than his arrival. I stepped aside. My apartment suddenly felt even smaller with him inside it. 600 square feet. Second-hand furniture, a kitchen table with one uneven leg. Adrian stopped when he saw the photograph and cufflink waiting beneath the yellow light above the stove. He did not touch either one. "Show me," he said. I handed him the photograph. The change in his expression was almost invisible, but I saw it. His jaw tightened when he recognized Daniel. Then his attention shifted to my father. "Thomas Carter," he said quietly. Hearing my father's name in Adrian's voice made my stomach twist. "You said you knew him." "I knew of him. That is not the same thing." "No." He turned the photograph over and read my father's message. "Trust the numbers." Adrian stared at those words longer than I expected. "Your father worked for a financial services company that handled accounts connected to businesses my family owned." "Connected how?" "Complicatedly. That sounds like a word rich people use when they do not want to answer questions." His eyes lifted to mine. In his mansion, I would probably have apologized immediately. In my apartment, I did not. Adrian placed the photograph down carefully. "You are right." Those 3 words surprised me again. "I was 23 when your father's name first appeared in an internal review. There were irregular transactions, money moving through companies that should not have been connected. Your father noticed them. Then what happened?" Adrian looked toward the rain running down my window. "The investigation disappeared. Investigations do not disappear. This one did. And my father died that same year." Adrian said nothing. I felt anger rising. Not loud anger, but the kind that makes every word sharper. "Did your family have something to do with his death?" "I do not know. That is not good enough." "I know." He did not defend himself. Somehow that made it harder to stay angry. I picked up the cufflink and placed it between us. "Then tell me why my father had this symbol." Adrian studied the silver wolf. "Years ago, that symbol was associated with a private network that moved money and information through legitimate companies. My family believed the network collapsed more than a decade ago." "You believed wrong." "Apparently." I pointed toward Daniel's face in the photograph. "And he has been standing beside you the entire time." Adrian's expression hardened, but his voice stayed measured. Which is why you cannot return to work tomorrow. I stared at him. Excuse me? Until I understand who knows about your father, you should stay somewhere secure. You mean your house? Yes. No. His eyes narrowed slightly. Emily, this is not a request. Something inside me became very still. Yesterday, that sentence might have frightened me. Today, I had watched him abandon millions because I had told him the truth. Then you have not learned anything from my warning. Silence filled the kitchen. Adrian could command attorneys, investors, security teams, and rooms full of men richer than I would ever be. But this was my apartment, my life, my choice. You believed my note because I gave you information, I said. Believe me now when I tell you, I will not trade one kind of fear for another, just because yours comes with better locks. Adrian stared at me for a long moment. Then something unexpected happened. He stepped back. All right, I blinked. All right? I will put security outside the building. They will not follow you unless you ask. And if I tell them to leave, his eyes held mine. They leave. That was the moment I first understood something about Adrian Cole. Power was easy for him, restraint was not. Yet standing in my tiny kitchen, he had chosen restraint. He picked up the photograph once more and pointed to the faded folder beneath my father's arm. There is a number printed here. I leaned closer. 7 digits, barely visible. Adrian's expression changed. What? I asked. He looked at me. That is not an account number. Then what is it? It is an archive reference. My heartbeat quickened. For what? Adrian set the photograph down. For records that were supposed to have been destroyed 11 years ago. The archive reference led us somewhere I never expected. A storage room beneath an accounting office Adrian's family had stopped using 9 years ago. By Thursday morning, Adrian had arranged access to the old records without telling Daniel what we were looking for. I went with him because I refused to sit in my apartment while other people decided what my father's past meant. The room smelled like dust, cardboard, and old paper. Metal shelves stretched from wall to wall beneath fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. Adrian removed his suit jacket, rolled back his sleeves, and started opening boxes himself. That almost made me smile. What? He asked. Nothing. You are staring. I have never seen a man who owns 7 black SUVs search through cardboard boxes. There are 6. There were 7 Tuesday. 1 belonged to a guest. I looked at him. That is the detail you wanted to correct. For half a second, something almost human softened his expression. Then he found the file. The 7-digit reference from my father's photograph was printed on a faded label near the bottom shelf. My hands shook when Adrian placed the box on the table. Inside were ledgers, transfer records, copies of invoices, and pages covered with my father's handwriting. Numbers, hundreds of them. At first, they meant nothing to me. Then I saw names I recognized. Mercer Holdings, Daniel's company. Several payments had moved through it before disappearing into businesses marked with the silver wolf symbol. Adrian read silently beside me, his expression growing colder with every page. Your father found a pattern, he said. He was tracking money being redirected through legitimate accounts. Was Daniel taking it? Not exactly. It looks like someone was building a separate financial network inside existing companies. I found another sheet folded between 2 ledgers. My father had written one sentence across the top. If these numbers are discovered, follow Mercer. I sat down. The metal chair scraped loudly against the concrete floor. 11 years of questions suddenly had handwriting. My father had not been careless. He had not simply left us drowning in bills after his death. He had been trying to expose something. I thought he failed us, I whispered. Adrian stopped turning pages. After he died, there were debts everywhere. My mother worked 2 jobs. I spent years angry at him because I thought he had been hiding financial problems from us. My throat tightened. He was hiding this. Adrian pulled another document from the box. His eyes moved across it, then stopped. Emily. I hated the gentleness in his voice, because it told me the next thing mattered. He turned the paper toward me. It was a compensation agreement, bearing my father's name. A substantial payment had been approved for consulting work. The final line was stamped pending. He never received it, Adrian said. Why? Because the file was closed 3 days after his death. I stared at the amount. It could have changed everything for my mother and me. Rent, school. Years of counting dollars at grocery stores. Adrian said quietly, "I can correct this." I looked up. With money? It was owed to him. "That is not what I mean." He waited. "Do not turn my father into another problem you can solve by writing a check." Adrian's face became unreadable again. "Then tell me what you want." The answer came immediately. "The truth. Even if you do not like it? Especially then." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "All right." We kept searching. Near the bottom of the box, Adrian found a sealed internal memorandum dated 11 years earlier. Daniel Mercer's name appeared twice. So did my father's. Adrian read the first page, then the second. His hand stopped. "What is it?" I asked. He looked at me differently now. Not like an employer looking at his maid. Not even like a powerful man looking at someone he needed to protect. He looked at me like I had become the only person in the room who deserved the answer. "Your father reported Daniel," he said, before anyone else suspected him. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, but I did not look away. Adrian placed the document carefully in front of me. Thomas Carter was trying to warn my family. I touched my father's signature at the bottom of the page. For 11 years, I had carried anger toward a man I thought had left us with nothing. Now his own handwriting was telling me the opposite. He had left behind the truth. We had simply found it too late. Then Adrian turned the final page, and his expression changed again. "Emily, there is something else." A handwritten note had been attached to the memorandum. My father had listed 3 names beneath the words Silver Wolf. Daniel Mercer was only the first. Adrian stared at the second name. I watched the color leave his face. "Who is it?" He did not answer immediately. When he finally looked at me, his voice was almost a whisper. "Someone who still has access to everything I own." The second name belonged to Robert Hale, Adrian's chief financial officer. I knew him only as the quiet man who arrived before sunrise twice a week and never left a coffee cup behind. Adrian knew him differently. "Robert has managed my family's accounts for 14 years, he said. "He approves transfers, reviews acquisitions, and has access to every corporate structure we use." I looked at my father's handwriting again. Daniel Mercer, Robert Hale. A third name had been damaged by water until only the first letter remained. "Then your problem is bigger than Daniel." Adrian closed the file. "Which means you are coming back to the mansion with me." I almost laughed. We already had this conversation. The circumstances changed. My answer did not. His jaw tightened. By the time we returned to my apartment that afternoon, 2 unfamiliar cars were parked across the street. Adrian noticed them before I did. He said nothing until we were upstairs. Then everything changed. A security officer appeared outside my door. Another waited near the stairwell. Adrian placed a new phone on my kitchen table and told me not to use my old one. "For how long?" I asked. "Until this is finished." "And when will that be?" "I do not know." That answer followed me through the next 24 hours. Friday morning, a black SUV waited downstairs to drive me anywhere I needed to go. Someone stood outside the grocery store while I bought cereal. Another person waited in the hallway when I came home. Nobody threatened me. Nobody touched me. Nobody even spoke unless necessary. Somehow, that made it worse. My life had become a carefully guarded room, without anyone asking whether I wanted the door closed. By Friday evening, I had enough. Adrian arrived at 7:10, carrying copies of the records from the archive. I met him at the door before he could remove his coat. "Call them off." He glanced toward the security officer. "No, that was fast. Because the answer is simple. For you." I pointed toward the hallway. "I cannot buy groceries without someone following me. They are protecting you. You keep calling it protection when what you mean is control." The apartment went silent. Adrian's expression hardened. "There are people who may know what your father discovered. I understand that. Then act like it." The words landed harder than he intended. I folded my arms. "Everyone around you does exactly what you say, does not he? This is not about my authority. It is always about your authority." His eyes narrowed. "Fear keeps people careful. No, sometimes fear just keeps them quiet." He stopped. I stepped closer to the table and placed my father's photograph between us. "That is what happened 11 years ago. People were afraid. People stayed quiet. My father tried not to, and his warning disappeared into a box. Adrian looked down at Thomas Carter's face. I continued before courage could leave me. You want loyalty, but you surround yourself with people who know that disagreeing with you has consequences. How are you supposed to know who is honest? You were honest, because I had nothing to gain from lying to you. His gaze returned to mine. You call this protection because control sounds uglier. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Adrian walked to the door. He looked at the security officer. Go downstairs. The man hesitated. Now. A moment later, the hallway was empty. Adrian returned and placed the new phone on the table. You can keep it or throw it away. Your choice. I stared at him. And the car? Gone. The people watching the building? Gone. Just like that. You asked me to listen. He opened my apartment door. If you want to walk away from this, Emily, walk away. I will not stop you. The open doorway seemed larger than it should have. For 2 days, all I had wanted was my freedom back. Now Adrian was giving it to me without conditions. I looked at my father's photograph. Trust the numbers. He had tried to finish something 11 years ago and never got the chance. I picked up my coat. Adrian's face became unreadable. Where are you going? With you. Why? I slipped the photograph into my purse, because now it is my choice. Something changed in his eyes. Not victory, respect. I stepped through the doorway first. We find out what Robert Hale is hiding. Then we find the third name. Adrian followed me into the hall. And after that, I pressed the elevator button. After that, you learn whether people follow you because they trust you or because they fear you. The elevator doors opened. For once, Adrian Cole had no answer, and for once, I did not need one. By Monday morning, Adrian had built a trap out of the one thing Daniel Mercer and Robert Hale believed he cared about most: the deal. He rescheduled the meeting for 10 o'clock and told everyone the $12 million agreement would be signed before lunch. Nothing about his voice suggested he knew anything. Daniel arrived smiling. Robert arrived carrying 2 leather folders. I watched from the small office beside the conference room, wearing my regular clothes instead of my maid uniform for the first time inside that house. It felt strange. I had spent 2 years entering those rooms to remove empty cups. Now Adrian had asked me to help decide whether the papers on the table could destroy what his family had built. My father's records were spread across the desk beside me. Trust the numbers. I had read every page twice. At 9:43, something finally bothered me. The totals matched, too perfectly. I compared the old transfer structure my father had uncovered with the new agreement Robert prepared. Different company names, different dates, same pattern. Money moved through 3 holding companies, then returned as ownership percentages instead of cash. I stopped breathing. This was not theft. It was transfer of control. Adrian thought Daniel wanted millions. My father had discovered something worse. I grabbed the original contract and searched the ownership section. Buried beneath pages of ordinary legal language was a conversion clause. If certain financial conditions were triggered after signing, voting rights would shift automatically. Adrian would still appear to own everything. He simply would not control it. I ran for the conference room. One of the staff members stepped toward me, but I did not stop. Through the doors, I saw Adrian at the head of the table. Daniel sat to his right. Robert was explaining the final page. A pen rested beside Adrian's hand. Adrian. Every face turned toward me. Years of instinct told me I did not belong there. My shoes were inexpensive. My coat had been bought on clearance. Everyone else at that table wore more money than I made in months. I walked in anyway. Daniel leaned back. This is a private meeting. Then you should have kept your numbers private. Robert's face changed. Adrian did not move. What did you find? He asked. I placed my father's ledger beside the contract. The agreement is not designed to take your money. It is designed to take your vote. Silence. I showed him the matching structures. These percentages repeat the same pattern my father tracked 11 years ago. If the conversion clause activates, control moves through the holding companies. Robert immediately shook his head. She does not understand corporate agreements. I looked at Adrian. Maybe I do not, but my father understood numbers, and somebody worked very hard to bury his. Daniel gave a quiet laugh. You are seriously considering destroying a $12 million deal because your maid found an old ledger. There it was. My maid. 2 words meant to put me back where he thought I belonged. Adrian looked at Daniel, then at me. I expected anger. Instead, his voice became almost gentle. "Emily, are you certain?" Nobody had ever asked me that question in that room before. I checked the figures one final time. "Yes." Adrian picked up the contract. Daniel's smile returned. Then Adrian tore the signature page cleanly in half. No shouting, no threats, just paper separating beneath his hands. "No," Adrian said. Daniel stared at him. "No what?" Adrian placed the pieces on the table. "I am not ending this because of a maid." He looked around at every person in the room. "I am ending it because she is the only person here who had nothing to gain by telling me the truth." Robert began gathering his folders, but Adrian's attorney stopped him with a simple request to leave the documents on the table. Everything after that happened quietly. Accounts were frozen for review. Lawyers secured the records. Independent auditors were called. Daniel and Robert were removed from every position that gave them access to coal businesses while the evidence was examined. No spectacle, no revenge, just consequences written in signatures, passwords, and closed doors. By sunset, the deal was gone, and their plan was exposed. Adrian still controlled his companies. I should have felt finished. Instead, I stood alone in the library holding my father's photograph. Adrian entered without speaking and placed a thin folder beside me. "We found this in Robert's archived files," he said. My father's name was printed across the front. I opened it. Inside was the compensation agreement I had seen before, but this copy had something the other did not: a final approval. The money had been authorized. It had simply never reached my family. Beneath it was a handwritten statement from Thomas Carter, explaining why he had reported the Silver Wolf accounts. The final sentence blurred as tears filled my eyes. "I did this so my daughter never has to inherit my silence. For 11 years, I had thought my father left me questions. Standing there, I finally understood. He had left me an answer, and Adrian had just found the part that could give it back to me." For the first time in 11 years, I cried for my father without being angry at him. I stood in Adrian's library, with Thomas Carter's final statement trembling in my hands, and every memory I had rewritten out of disappointment began changing shape. The locked drawers, the late phone calls, the nights he sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by receipts and numbers. I had thought he was hiding failure from us. He had been trying to protect the truth long enough for someone to hear it. Adrian did not tell me to stop crying. He did not offer some perfect sentence meant to make grief smaller. He simply stood several feet away and let me have the moment. Eventually, he placed another document on the desk. There is something else. It was the compensation agreement. This time, the final approval was attached. The amount made me sit down. "Your father earned this," Adrian said. It was approved before the file was buried. With the adjustments my attorneys calculated, it belongs to his estate. I looked at him. "I do not want charity." "Good." His answer was immediate. "Because this is not mine to give you." He pushed the document toward me. It was his. "Which means it was always yours." That mattered more than the number. Adrian could have written me a check and called himself generous. Instead, he gave my father back something money could not buy, proof that his work had value. 3 days later, I resigned from the Cole household. I expected Adrian to argue. He did not. I placed my brass house key on his desk, beside the spot where I used to leave his morning espresso. "Is this goodbye?" he asked. I looked around the library I had cleaned hundreds of times. "It is me choosing what happens next." His eyes stayed on mine. Then he nodded. "Fair enough. No order to stay, no security waiting outside, no bargain disguised as protection. I walked through the front entrance instead of the service door, and nobody stopped me. Over the next 4 months, my life became quieter. Not glamorous, not magically perfect, just mine. I moved into a slightly better apartment, where the ceiling did not leak when it rained. I put most of my father's money into savings, and used part of it to enroll in bookkeeping courses. Numbers had been his language. I wanted to understand what he had seen. Adrian and I spoke only twice during those months. Both conversations were short. I heard through former co-workers that things at the mansion had changed. Independent audits became permanent. Employees could report concerns without going through senior management. Adrian had started asking questions before giving orders. Maybe that sounded small. For a man like him, it was not. On a cold Tuesday morning in November, I found myself standing outside the Cole mansion again. I almost turned around. Then I remembered my father's words. Silence had already taken enough from us. I walked through the front door, wearing a navy coat and carrying nothing except my old brass key. Adrian was in the library. Of course he was. A cup of black coffee sat beside him. He looked up, and for once, surprise reached his face before he could hide it. Emily. Hearing my name no longer felt strange. Adrian. His gaze dropped to the key in my hand. Are you here to return something? I placed it on the desk. No, I already returned the key. Then why are you here? 4 months earlier, that question would have terrified me. Now I smiled. I came to see if the man who finally learned to listen is still here. Adrian looked at the chair across from him. For 1 second, I expected the old version of him to tell me to sit. He did not. He simply pulled the chair out and waited. The choice was mine. I sat down. That simple movement carried more weight than any declaration could have. I remembered standing beside that same desk in a maid's uniform, replacing his coffee while he barely knew my name. Now I sat across from him as an equal, not because he had rescued me, and not because his money had changed my life, but because somewhere between a silver cufflink and a $12 million contract, we had both learned something about power. My father had taught me that numbers told the truth when people did not. Adrian taught me something else without meaning to. A person could command an entire room and still need someone brave enough to disagree. He had ruled his world by making people listen when he spoke. Somehow, I changed a small part of that world by refusing to silence my own voice. Some men change only after losing everything. Adrian changed because someone with nothing to gain finally taught him what was worth keeping.